Hey friends, happy Wednesday. Hope you're well. Welcome to the Bearded Dog Podcast. This is your host, Adam Mason. One quick note before we get into the main episode. Just wanted to make a note that we recorded this episode before the death of George Floyd and the recent protests all around the country, which, at least for me personally, I am very in support of. And I feel like Branden, our guest, is also a supporter of the protests, but I'll let him talk a little bit about his passions and his good news on here. So just a little quick note, this episode is about good news overall, and I think Branden is one of those guys who is helping to lead the charge and sharing good stories. So just want to say that before we get started. I just wanted to let you know about something really, really fun we've got going on in the Bearded Talk community. That's our Facebook group, togfb.com, where we do a lot of live workshops with entrepreneurs, photographers, similar to this podcast, but we kind of go deeper and a little bit into the nitty gritty about what they do and how to get it done. So something we're having really, really fun, July 1st at 7 p.m. in our Facebook group is we're going live with Rebecca Viola. If you haven't listened to her episode, definitely listen to it. She is kind of the next level of Instagram marketing expertise, where she's going to share every little thing that she does to grow her Instagram. I've seen her do challenges on her Instagram story where she'll grow her Instagram 100 people in a day, 200 people in a day, and she shows us how she does it. It's absolutely incredible. So if you're looking for a practical way to grow your Instagram following, you just really want to get those numbers up, or you just want to feel like Instagram is no longer a waste, come check us out Wednesday, July 1st, 7 p.m. in our Facebook group, TOGFB. Come join the Facebook community. We would love to have you. It's free, no cost to join, anything like that. It would be wonderful. But today's episode, I'm really excited. This is my good friend, Branden Harvey. I have known this guy for a few years. We met at a charity water event, and since then, he's just been a huge influence on my life and kind of the focus behind my own brand. Branden's one of those guys. He's a storyteller. He's focused on finding and sharing the good in the world. He's always one of those people that is like hopeful and optimistic. In addition to hosting his own podcast, Sounds Good, which is incredible. He's had insane guests. He's created a community with hundreds of thousands of world changers with this company, Good, Good, Good. He was also on the Miley Cyrus Instagram show recently, which I just think is absolutely hilarious to get that email when it's like, hey, Miley wants to have you on. He did that. He's been on the New York Times. Like, that's pretty crazy. I met Branden along his journey as he was transitioning from a full-time photographer. Like, he's shot weddings, he shot music, he shot brands, and to global storyteller for things like Target, Southwest Airlines. And then he's moved on from that to where he launched a Kickstarter about a newspaper to share good and hopeful stories in the world. And now that's his full-time job. So really fascinating story about somebody who pivoted and brought all of their expertise with them to help make the world a better place. So without any further ado, here's my good buddy, Branden Harvey. Oh, Branden, it's so good to have you on the podcast, man. It's been a long time, and I feel like one of my favorite stories was when we got to meet via Charity Water, doing some work for them. And, Charity Water was like this beacon of hope for me during, as I was discovering photography. Like, I wasn't even passionate about it at that time, but I saw Charity Water, and they were just fantastic storytellers, and I wanted to do anything I could to just, be involved with them, help out as much as I could. And so I would drive from Philly or DC to New York City every year and do the Charity Water Ball for free and would shoot it. And somehow they still let me come. Like, they had all the best photographers they could ever want in the world there, helping out. And little old me got to come. And I remember Cubby Graham, good buddy of ours. I got to meet him, and it was just like saying, hey, we kind of had chatted on Instagram, and he said, hey, Branden's coming. And I was like, Branden who? And he was like, Branden Harvey. It was one of those things where it was like, it could have easily just been like, oh, who's this person? And I instantly, looked at you on Instagram real quick, and it was like, storyteller providing hope and good stories in the world, through communications or whatever. And I was like, what? This is mind-blowing. Like, you could do this as well. And, because I had seen kind of Charity Water's slice, Esther Havens and Jeremy Snell's slice. And then I was like, oh, there's a Branden Harvey shaped, mold here. I was like, that's incredible. And then I got to meet you, and it was really cool. And I didn't know. And then I realized literally yesterday, as the time of this recording, that I was looking through old photos. You came to an Insta meet in DC on the rooftop of the Washington Post. So, man, it's just been a long time coming. And I think as we talked about pre-show, there's so many people, especially right now during this time, that are hoping for some good news. And we'll get to that, and hoping for, I think this is a time when pressure causes people to, either push back or pivot. And you're one of those guys that I've seen transition to what, to me, at least on the outside, obviously we don't talk every day, but it's like, it feels like you're in your sweet spot. So all that to say, man, welcome to the show. It's such a pleasure to have you. You're awesome, man.
Dude, no, I'm so happy to be here. And I just want to say, like, meeting you that night was such a treat because you've probably been in situations like this where you feel like you're out of place. So like I showed up at that event and everybody was dressed in these amazing tuxes and they look like they belonged at this amazing charity gala. And I showed up as like the professional Snapchatter, and I just didn't feel like I was meant to be there. And you came up and you were so welcoming and so kind, and you took this badass photo of me where I felt like when I saw the photo, I was like, I feel like I belonged here. Like I felt like I looked good, felt cool.
You did, man.
And that was all you with both your photography skills, but just you being a kind and generous human. And so I'm so glad we got to connect there, and I'm so glad we've gotten to stay connected.
I love that, man. That was such a fun time. That's how I want everybody to feel. Like my mission now is bigger than photography, but that's how I want people intrinsically to feel. Is like, okay, what's this person about? And you were just so happy. You had your signature haircut at the time, which we're all going through as millennial people online with our signature headshots, and then we changed those. So
I know I'm about to change my profile picture for the first time to like not have a hair, and
right?
It feels like it's like a rebrand that I don't want to do.
Oh yeah, you definitely like. On the down low, and maybe this is obviously a public podcast, but like, let us know if you like lose followers or gain followers, or like, because I feel like
that's
a
good question. Yeah.
Back in the day, like early, like 2010, all of the digital influencers that I knew at that time, which is not many, but they just said, hey, like, make your headshot the same on every network, keep it consistent, and then people just get used to it over time. And I did that same thing. Even if it was like the worst photo, it was consistent. And who knows? That's one of those things you can't measure, but I would love to see, what effect that has for you of like going away from the old haircut. Like, is he still the sweet, Nashville boy we once knew, or is he the new Portland guy? But anyway, I just want to get into a little bit of your story, and again, I just think it's I'm passionate about a guy who's pivoted. So, little bit of background, I'll let you fill in the gaps. Like, you were a full-fledged, like, freelance, awesome photographer, and then I think the time I met you, you were doing a lot of kind of, traditional brand deals, storytelling for brands, stuff like that. So give me that little bit of background as far as like your photography journey to fill in the gaps for all the photographers that listen to this.
Yeah. And I love that we've kind of got a little bit of a photography audience because I can talk shop a little bit more here. Yeah. I grew up in a small little hometown, Pullman, Washington, and there weren't a lot of other people who I didn't feel like I connected with a lot of other creative people in my community. It was a small town, so it didn't have a huge creativity scene, but there were a few people that I was like, oh, these people are doing what I want to do. They're living into this vocation, and I want to kind of follow in their footsteps. But for the most part, I turned to the internet to find inspiration in people who were just thinking outside the box. And I'll say, in my little hometown, it was just like, it was straight up 90s style photography for everything. Like, that was the style that everybody was doing, like a blur over the photos, a fake, like it was as if people were standing in water.
Selective color.
Yeah, honestly, it was so funny. I loved it. Well, I hated it, but in hindsight, I love it. But I was looking at photographers, like, I think about Benj Heish was a photographer I was looking at the time, who since then we've become friends, which is really cool. I was looking at Sarah Rhodes. I was looking at, of course, Jeremy Cowart. Chase Jarvis, and seeing people who were doing things different than my hometown, and started to try to create things like that as a high schooler. So I became a professional photographer in those early days. Yeah. And then something's like unique was happening. All these photographers I was admiring, they were using their platform to make a difference and to make pivots to dive into like the world of impact. I remember Ben shooting for some nonprofits and going to India. I remember Jeremy founding Help Portrait, and just being so inspired by these people who are making a difference. And so as I was growing in my photography career, I started looking around at like, how can I do this in my small town? How can I do this as I go off to college in Portland, Oregon? And I started to try to emulate that as much as I can. And that's where I started discovering photographers like Esther Havens and Jeremy Snow,
Sure.
who you mentioned earlier, who have created all of the iconic photography for Charity Water and a million other incredible organizations.
Yeah.
And so I started kind of going down that path towards being a humanitarian photographer and kind of a more photojournalistic storytelling route. And I don't know, it's really special getting to like have artists you admire and appreciate, like a diverse set who what you're most drawn to is not necessarily the aesthetics, like the muddy blacks and whites, or the blue and yellow tinted colors of the time, but it was more so their intent and their focus on storytelling and moving the needle and making a difference. And so having all of these styles combined, but this same like kind of shared passion, was a really helpful, like, I guess, motivating factor for me in being a photographer, where I went from being a senior portrait photographer to being like a bit of a music photographer and a wedding photographer to eventually getting to work full time with brands doing good. So like social impact brands and nonprofits, getting to travel the world, 6 continents, telling stories of people moving the needle for good in the world. And so, yeah, I guess I had like a full on like trajectory of a career in the world of photography. And then I kind of hit this breaking point where I was like, maybe I'm not actually that passionate about photography. Like I'm maybe okay at it. I enjoy it. I like the gear. I like editing. I like shooting. But that's not like what gets me out of bed in the morning. What gets me out of bed in the morning is this deeper meaning and this deeper message. And so then I started exploring, okay, what does it look like to maintain that core principle, that core thing I'm passionate about, but maybe venture outside of the world of photography a little bit.
Yeah. What do you think about the idea? This is something that I've like kind of grown into, you know, in my 30s now, right? Like prior to my 30s, I was a photographer that, you know, like we talked about earlier, like I wanted to make people happy. If I could make a living at this, great. And then, you know, I wanted to create photos that were, you know, ultimately impressive or good. And, you know, what I've realized too is like being articulate is that a lot of photographers at the beginning, we want the approval of other photographers.
Yeah.
You know, like it's the most valuable. But then now being in my 30s, it's what I've realized now too, photography is like just the expression, as I've done a lot of like deep work on myself, photography is just the expression of my mission. And like I think about it in my brain and like, well, if I had to pivot and do something totally different today, like whether I was, you know, working at Chipotle or a project manager or social media, like I would still want my life mission, you know, my brand mission or whatever to be, you know, exemplified in that aspect. So do you think there's like a little bit of that? And like photography for both of us, maybe it was just like part of that journey of like finding that, you know, as that expression, and it easily could have been something else for you. But then now, you know, obviously it's like you will get to where you're at now, but it's like you've gotten to find a new path kind of on the way of like executing your journey. I don't know. That was a lot of things to say. Would you get what I'm saying?
Well, that just reminded me of the proudest moment that I had as a photographer was this one time when I was maybe like 19 and I was photographing this wedding, and I was just like having a great time, loving spending time with the bridesmaids. And one bridesmaid on the spot, middle of the wedding day, she says, I just got engaged 3 weeks ago. I'm getting married in July, and I haven't even seen your photos yet, but I know that I want you to be my photographer. And she hired me on the spot. And it wasn't because my photography was amazing. I was okay. You know, I was fine. But it was, you know, apparently because she just felt like she enjoyed my presence on the day of. And hopefully I was, you know, putting off a sense of love and care for this couple and for their friends and family. And you know, that was something that was just modeled to me by the photographers who took me under their wing, and just by the amazing people I had in my life. But it really brought it back home for me, this idea that, you know, the photography is just the method for how, you know, I get to bring my values to the table. But it can be anything. It can be it can be filmmaking. It can be writing. It could be Chipotle, which, you know, I always think about that. I'm like, I would love to just work for Chipotle and get a lot of free burritos and love people well and get good benefits. And
we should do maybe this would be like socially off-putting. I have no idea, but like, it'd be really fun to have like a random hodgepodge of people just job switching, like a reality show of job switching, where like, we're gonna go work at a Chipotle, and like I'm running the hotline, and you're I don't know if you're cooking, cashier, manager, or whatever, and maybe there's other people there. It'd be hilarious, like a very funny reality show. And I don't know, we're just like, bring me the beans, Branden.
Yeah, there's a lot. I will tell you, there's a lot of things in the world that I would be very bad at, and I'm very grateful that I work for myself, because I'm learning that I have like very unconventional ways of doing things, but because I work for myself, I can build out my systems so that I have a very normal output. But I'm like last night, I literally, and this is not healthy, and I only do it like about once a month, but I did a full all-nighter last night because we're on deadline for the newspaper. And so we're going to print later today. So I was like, well, I got to get this stuff done. And I did that. And I would never do that for like another job, but I'll do it for myself because I can manage that weird balance of things. I don't know. That's a bit of a tangent, but
no, I love that, man. So catch me up to speed on, so became a humanitarian photographer, or, you know, we'll use that in quotes, right? Because it's like a newish thing. Yeah. At least in the social media scape the last 10 years. And then like, what was that? Did you intentionally say, well, maybe, you know, I don't want to keep this as just photography, or were brands coming to you? Like, I feel like a lot of times too, you'll get that one gig that's like, hey, Branden, we know you shoot and we want you to do that, but would you also like consult for us or talk to us about this? And you're like, well, sure, yeah, I would. And then was that the first taste of like, oh, what this could be, and kind of like pursuing more brand stuff? And then you were like, oh, well, now I know all this stuff about other brands, and then let me create my own. Like, what was that transition like from strictly, you know, still a photographer, but with a different clientele, quote unquote, to, you know, to where we're at with the newspaper?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think, so I guess simultaneously, as I was starting to get gigs around Portland and then traveling around the country and around the world, especially kind of in the impact space, I started to grow a bit of an audience on Instagram. And part of it was just like, I got on Instagram early, not the earliest. Like I didn't even have an iPhone. It was only on iPhone. And I bought an iPhone like a year or two after Instagram came out. And so I had access to the app, and I was like, oh, I'm just going to start shooting photos. And because I was a photographer, it was kind of cheating because it's a photo-based social network. So like, you kind of cut through the noise more than non-photographers who didn't know how to take photos. But I was finding that I was growing a little bit faster than other people. And I remember hitting like 1,000 followers and being like, oh, like this is an interesting thing, this social media thing. Maybe I've got a knack for it. And I guess I had like spent time on Twitter and Flickr and kind of enjoyed the world of social media, and especially the world of like photography and social media and how that can kind of play together. And I think I just found it really interesting. So I was like, oh, I guess I'll just like keep on leaning into this. But it wasn't at all a choice of like, this is a path I'm going to go down. It was like, oh, this is like a fun hobby. Like I enjoy connecting with people on Instagram, figuring out if like, I guess hashtags were maybe a thing, you know, I was like figuring out how to use hashtags, you know, whatever was kind of going on in those early days. I was trying to figure all of that out just out of interest. But then exactly what you said happened, where I had a brand reach out to me and they were like, hey, you've got follow. I guess I had like tens of thousands of followers at this point. So like, I guess somehow I had grown over the course of maybe a year. And a brand reached out, and there wasn't the word influencer marketing yet, or influencer yet, or at least it wasn't being used in my space. And somebody reached out. They're like, you've got followers. We've got a coffee brand. Do you want to post photos of our coffee in exchange for money? Like they like spelled it out just like so plain language. And I was like, oh, this is a thing? Like, okay, sign me up. That sounds great. And I do remember thinking through like, all right, well, let's figure out how to make sure that these are like really dope photos so that my followers still like seeing them. You know, like I wasn't just selling out. I was like, oh, I can like take photos of this cool, beautiful thing. Like this is the subject of my photo for the day. And I can like, this will pay for me to like keep on investing time on this platform. Let's do it. And so that was kind of the beginning where I was like, oh, this is like, I didn't realize this was a path I could go down. And I guess at that point, that was when I started to kind of look around at my context and realizing photography only got me halfway here. The other part was the social media, just the interest in paying attention to how the app was working and how kind of the systems at play. And then the other part was the writing, the captions. There was no caption length limit in those early days.
Oh, wow.
And so I remember being like one of the earlier people to have really long captions to a point where people would unfollow me. And now everybody's captions are blog posts, basically.
Yeah.
In fact, I think this is like super dorky in inside baseball, but I was so well known at one point for the caption lengths that an Instagram employee personally emailed me the day before Instagram changed it so that it would have a caption length limit. And then there was the read more, like dot button that would cut it off. He's like, hey, I just want you to know, like, we appreciate your writing, but we are implementing this change. We hope it's a better user experience for everybody. You know, like he had all this stuff, but he wanted to make sure that I knew that that they were sorry that it was going to affect my cat, which is like just so funny.
That's awesome. It's like I remember back in the day, like 2010, 2012, it was like the longer caption, it would show you the whole thing. Yeah. Period. You know, so you're like,
which was annoying. Like it would, like, I'm sure if somebody just wanted to see my photos, that's annoying to them to see this whole long caption about, you know, photo of a river.
From a marketing perspective, it's brilliant, right? That's like what everybody was doing. And now, it's exactly what you said. I think I was listening to your podcast with Lindsay Roman and Evie Rupp, both guests of The Weirdest Hog, which are great. And, you know, both of them are very big on, you know, like, it feels like they always have something to say and they're always ready, you know, maybe that's just our impression, but like their captions are long. Like I bet they're meeting the limit every single time. And it seems the quote unquote current like thing to do right now is to like go long and write your blogs just on Instagram. And it is funny. Like I'll find myself, like I created an actual blog today of a past gig I did, and I was like, oh, I feel like I've written this already, and I went to Instagram and already just copied and pasted the caption.
That's
I was like,
so funny.
Here's my blog post, like my 300-400 words that I needed for SEO purposes, and I was like, what in the world? And I was also like, why did I type this with my thumbs? Like what is going on? But that's the reality, and I think it's from social media too. It's like it's always going to be. It's like the necessary evil, right? Like unless you are 100%, I always tell people like, unless your business model and your clientele is like 100% saturated to where like, nope, my bills are guaranteed to be paid every time by, you know, XYZ or whatever. It's like, you have to play a little bit. And then some of us have to play more, or we want to play more, you know, and then for us, like you have some semblance of success. Like for me, the thing I love telling like my mentees and other photographers is like, I don't have 10,000 followers yet. I don't have Swipe Up, but Instagram is my largest lead source for our, you know, wedding business and all that kind of stuff, which is so crazy. Because it's one of those things that I don't feel like we're particularly good at. I don't think our feed is curated. Like we break a lot of the rules, you know, and I'm like, why is this still working? Like what is going on?
Yeah.
And I want it to work better, of course, but it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, there's the downside of social media, right? And like, especially during all this craziness time, and there's bad news and medium news, if you will, and then some good news every once in a while. It's like, you know, we're inundated with it, but at the same time, like it is a very useful tool for spreading information or influence or, you know, just our convictions or whatever. And so anyway, that was a long rant.
No.
Yeah.
Well, I'm fully with you on that, where, you know, social media does feel like a necessary evil. And, you know, I just spoke about how for a while it was really this hobby and passion and a total interest. And I'm still very passionate about the idea of how can we use this for good, or how can we just use it effectively, you know, to put food on the table for your family. But it is no longer like an exciting thing for me. Like I don't wake up excited to like go do stuff on Instagram right now.
Yeah.
And so, if you look at my account, like I probably posted 7 times this whole year, it's been, and of course I'm doing much more on stories, but like I post way less on my personal account. And part of that is just like for mental health. I'm trying to just take care of myself. When I share a bunch on social media, I find that I'm not doing as well. But the other thing is I have, my other company that we are really focused on social media and really focused on, the question of how do we use this platform for good? Yeah. And so maybe some of my passion has gone over to that direction as well. Totally. But I don't foresee a day where social media is 0% of my life. I think that would be very difficult, like you said. And so in the meantime, it's just, okay, how do we function best? How do we make this work as good as it can while keeping in mind our own sanity, our own health, our impact on others and their own health. And then lastly, how we can make sure that it's actually effective and helpful in doing the right things that we want it to do.
Right. 100%. It's like it's the scariest place because of what we can say or share and how it can be interpreted, and like the ultimate quote unquote like social network. And this episode is not supposed to be about social media, but like is if somehow, I imagine someday this is actually going to happen, is like the things we wanted to share got the attention of the people we wanted to share it to at the time that was comfortable and best for them. And, at the same time, could somehow people who were looking for what we were sharing found it at the right time. And I feel like that's a long way off. And obviously, but at the same time, I mean, like if we talk about in front of our iPhones, like sandwich shops or, cordless lawnmowers, like we're going to see Instagram ads for that. So, that might be pretty close. But dude, speaking of good in the world, so I know that you have this terrible transition, but
no, it's the best transition.
You were a humanitarian photographer, started doing brand deals. And I think when I started like actively kind of following you, engaging you post Charity Water meeting, it was really cool to see like, even these people that you've just met and you're like, oh, I love what Brandon's doing. So, because there's some level of you see people in their job and you're like, supposedly they're doing it full time, not in an insulting way. You're just like, oh yeah, supposedly they're able to make a living only on this, right? They're not working at Chipotle, or whatever. And then like I see the first one that I had saw and I was like, oh, Target or Southwest Airlines or, Red. And I was like, whoa, okay, this is awesome. Like this is so cool. And I was like, that is, and again, it was like the tip of the spear of like, it was like, it just felt early. There was not that much influencer marketing at that time. And it was like all these brands, for better or for worse, without like judging any corporation or anything like that, like they all have budget for doing really good things. And they're always looking for new ways of like, how can we tap into this section of the world, if you will, and like, what can we do to give back? And not even in a bad way. Like the people that you've worked for, I'm sure at least most of them are probably like solid people because they get to be in charge of like the best part of the corporation. And you started doing that. And then what was at that point where I think like you did a Kickstarter for the first newspaper? Like where was that transition point? Did you just say, oh, I want to do a newspaper, or I was with my parents and I saw they had newspapers back in the, like, because it's just such a random thing to what you do now, and that's like totally. I love that, and I just want to dive into that.
Yeah, it really is interesting because my full-time job was doing social media and partnering with brands and helping them tell stories, and I had really made a full-on pivot to saying I want to help brands tell stories that matter. I'm not just gonna do the ad for your product. We're going to dive into something that really matters, and I'm going to try to either build out a nonprofit partnership for you, or we're going to do some storytelling that really moves the needle for people internally. And I'm so grateful for just, I think that part of what it was the early days of social and innovation. And I just love ideas. Like I'm always coming up with new ideas. And so when I was able to find the right partner at the right brand, with the right bosses who would give them a little bit of freedom, then we could do anything together. And we really, it was always a really fun collaborative effort, with Southwest being the best example, in my opinion, of just like a total collaboration for a year and a half together. And so that was like my full-time gig. And I was honestly like pretty comfortable, doing fine, really enjoying my work. But I kept on coming back to these like, I kind of kept on coming back to the humanitarian photography space of all these nonprofits that I had traveled around with, and realizing that there were some stories that were so hopeful and so good, but couldn't be wrapped up in like a sponsored brand post. They couldn't be wrapped up in just a neat, tidy Instagram post.
Sure.
I now refer to it as like real messy hope. You know, it's a little bit complicated, a little bit nuanced. But ultimately it's stories of people making a really big difference in the world in complicated but inspiring ways. And I just thought to myself, these are stories that are going untold. And I started looking around the internet, looking for other people who were maybe telling these stories that I could, support or come work with or whatever. And I just wasn't seeing it anywhere. And so it began this process for me of saying like, okay, well, how can I get these stories out into the world? And it actually started off really slowly. At first I was like, well, I'm just going to start an email newsletter and I'm going to start sharing these because it's just like, there's no text limit. I can just put it in there.
Yeah.
And I literally posted on Instagram one time. I was like, hey, drop your comment or drop your email in the comments and I'll copy and paste it into MailChimp and I'll send you an email on Tuesday. And that's how I got started. And then a short time after that, I started the podcast, which was really just me. Like if you listen back to the beginning of our podcast, Sounds Good with Branden Harvey, you'll hear me going through this internal journey of trying to figure out like, what does it mean to make a difference? What is the difference between, this good news that makes you feel good versus this good news that like is something a little bit deeper than that. And also just like, how can I make a difference and how can I start something that really matters and builds a legacy beyond me? And in the process of that, I remember interviewing this guy. He's a neuropsychologist, and he studies happiness and its effects on the brain. His name is Dr. Rick Hansen. And he talks about this idea that we all have this internal negativity bias. Bad news sticks to our brains like Velcro, and good news slides right off our brains like Teflon. And I was like, oh, that's why these complex but important good news stories aren't sticking with people. That's why they're not being shared, because our brains are just like engineered to not work that way. And with all these other people I was connecting with, I was realizing I want to make a difference. I want to do something, and I want to share the stories of these people making a difference. And then with Dr. Rick Hansen, realizing, oh, here's the thing that's perhaps holding people back, among other things.
Yeah.
So what can I do to like cut through the noise with these stories that need to be told? And I had tried it on the newsletter, tried it on like social media, on the podcast to like some degree of success, but I was like, I think we can go further. Yeah. And my hunch was just, we got to do the dumbest thing possible. We got to do the thing that nobody else is doing, because everything else people are doing doesn't work. Yeah, so what's the dumbest thing that nobody's doing in a time where literally, I think that year, New York Times had more layoffs than ever. Subscriptions for print publications were just falling away. And I was like, well, let's just, let's make a newspaper filled with good news. Let's call it the Good Newspaper, and let's see if that sticks. And that I didn't have confidence in it because I launched it on Kickstarter. It's me saying, if this thing doesn't work, like, I'm not making this. I've got to put this out there, ask people if they want to support it. And if it works, then the money ends up in the bank account and we can print this paper. And if people hate it, then I'm not out really much money except for, Kickstarter video production.
Right.
And so I launch it very nervously, very much like wanting to back out of the project multiple times, just with a whole lot of self-doubt, wondering like, who am I to do this? Does this really matter? Is this going to make a difference? Is this the dumbest way I could do this? And then we launch it, and within 52 hours, we were fully funded. And at the end of the 30 days, we had more than doubled our initial goal. And we were set up to make more than a year of this paper. And, that began a whole new journey, of course, of just figuring out the creative process of how to make a newspaper. But in that moment, that was just a game changer for me, where I was like, oh, all of my life experiences leading up until now has set me up to be able to do this unique thing. I had a social media audience, and they were the community that brought this thing to life. It wasn't me that brought it to life.
Sure.
It was my, maybe experience with all these nonprofits and traveling the world that allowed me to bring this idea to people. But this community was the group that made this thing happen. And so I felt this deep, beautiful obligation to say, all right, I've got to do people proud. I've got to make this thing that I think matters, and several thousand other people also think matters. And so that was the beginning of the Good Newspaper.
Dude, that's insane. What did it feel like when the Kickstarter blew up? Did it feel like, holy crap? Because I feel like it's when, especially in the marketing world, when you have a post that's going to hit, and then you have a post that doesn't, and you're like, and you don't know why. You expect this one, you're like, this is not going to go too crazy. Is that what it felt like? Or what can you kind of give an example of how that felt?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I think that by the end of building out the project, to be honest, I think I had lost a lot of my motivation.
Sure.
And a lot of my passion for this, and that's maybe how most of us are with projects. You're super excited at the beginning, and you share with other people, and they're really excited. And then the further you get into the weeds, the more you're like, wait, you're almost losing sight of the core meaning of this. And for me, it was, I want people to feel less overwhelmed by what's going on in the world, because I genuinely believe that there's a lot of good in the world. Yeah. I want people to feel more hopeful, because there is a lot of good that's going undertold. And I want to motivate people to take action. But I was just spending time on spreadsheets and, data exports and stuff. And so I had lost track of that core thing. And so to put it out in the world and realize that just the concept alone, the video and the belief that there's good in the world, and that, it's worth doing something a little outlandish to make that happen. Yeah. It was deeply motivating and gratifying. And it kind of brought me back to that core of saying, oh, this is what it's about for me. It really is about energizing people enough to the fact that we were able to energize people enough to spend X amount of dollars on a print newspaper that they couldn't even see it yet. It wasn't real, meant that there was something core there. Because literally I've never bought a newspaper in my life, and now I'm making it, and most of the people subscribing probably had never paid for one before. Yeah. And so I was like, oh, this really does matter. And so it re-energized me in a huge way.
That's awesome. It's almost like everything you were telling me just wanted to be oh, that's like planning a wedding. At the beginning, yes. You're like, yes, let's go. And then a month out, you're like, I just want to be done. And then, but hopefully the day, or hopefully launch day, rejuvenates you and revitalizes you, and is hey, and it's again, the happiness and the excitement, helps you go the first few months, and you eat up all the fun stuff to do and part of the project. Then you get to the 40 or 50% where you're like, oh, here come the spreadsheets, or here comes oh, I'm going to try out, I imagine different paper suppliers or whatever. Yep. You're just what in the world? Or especially at the beginning, if you're doing things yourself, you're just oh man, InDesign or whatever you guys use to even print it. Yeah. I think too, it's it was such a thing in the space where at that time, anything that was printed by, quote unquote millennials, I think you even referenced Kinfolk and other magazines like that. It was those were so cool. Those were too cool for school kind of magazines and kind of publications and stuff like that. And here comes just jolly Branden with the Good Newspaper, bright-eyed, and it all matched, which is very on brand, which is great. and you're just hey, I can hang out with the Kinfolk folks, but this is also something we need to do. And I think there's something to be said. I wonder, getting kind of nitty gritty about good news, but what the Dr. Hansen said, and then at the same time too, I wonder, and maybe this is part of just our privilege as white dudes, but good is assumed. And I think for us, like, there's part of me that outside of the good newspaper and people telling me that there's like hopeful things in the world, like, it's so quick to be like, yeah, kids should be graduating from high school, you know, or more than ever. Like, why was there even a percentage that don't, right? Like, you know, growing up, I would never know that there were kids that didn't graduate, right? And it's like so many of those things where you just don't acknowledge it until you're like, oh, like, one, life can be hard. And there was a pastor that wrote a book called Community is Messy, and it was like so perfect. And it's like, and the world looks different for everybody. And it's like, hey, like, these good is still amazing, but it can't be assumed. Like, we have to love it or like search for it. And I think the difference between like happiness and joy, like true, those messy good news stories that you talk about, like they're deeper and last longer, you know, than like a funny meme, you know, that is like, oh yeah, that's great, you know, or whatever. Like, it has to be a deeper purpose.
Totally. Yeah, I'm completely with you on that. And that's something that I think I really had to confront early on before we launched this was, you know, as a straight white guy living in a middle-class community who, you know, was getting fine brand deals and doing fine financially, you know, I have enough privilege where, in theory, I really can completely tune out from most of the injustices in the world. We're recording this on a day where another black man was killed by police officers unjustly. And I'm sure on the day that this comes out, there will probably be another similar story. And the reality is my life experience allows me to pretend that doesn't exist. And ultimately, that news won't affect me. If I tune out the news, if I put on some filters, like, that's not going to affect me. But there are people who live in that community. There are people, you know, like this man who that bad news knocks on their front door. Totally. And, you know, due to, you know, just the circumstances that they're in. And as somebody of privilege, I think it's my responsibility, it's my obligation to not squander that. Because if you are experiencing injustice, heartbreak, and pain, like, why should you have to be the person on the front lines of advocating for a solution to that injustice, fighting back against the oppression? People of privilege who aren't experiencing that injustice have such a responsibility and an opportunity to step in and move the needle and make a difference. And that's what I wanted the newspaper to be. I didn't want it to be like a safe space where we just run around and say, oh, everything is awesome. I wanted this to be a place where we dive into heartbreak and pain and injustice, but then we don't stay there. We say, okay, let's look around. I mean, it comes back to this quote from Mr. Rogers that's the core of everything. He said, when I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. And so that's what we do first and foremost is we say, let's mourn this pain, but let's not turn off the TV. Let's look a little bit closer for the helpers. And then we're going to celebrate them. We're going to elevate the work that they're doing. But then lastly, we're going to join in and become helpers ourselves. And if we don't do those things, it's a waste. I don't want somebody who just wants happiness, like, removed from pain to get the newspaper. You know, like, don't order it. Don't give us any money. Right.
It's not utopia. It's real.
Exactly. Our goal is to motivate people to take action. And we're never going to like sell papers saying, hey, this is a newspaper full of homework. You know, it doesn't work, but that's to some degree how I look at it. It's like, this paper should be inspiring enough where you go, wow, like, what a cool way to make a difference. I have to do something equivalent. And you kind of spoke to this idea, this difference between like joy and happiness. And that's something that's like an idea that I definitely grew up in the faith communities I grew up in as well. And in the work I do now, I think of it similarly as the difference between hope and optimism. And there's this quote by this brilliant man named Eric Liu. And he said, I love this. He says, to be optimistic is to assume things will work out. To be hopeful is to realize that things can work out if you work at them. Hope requires responsibility and agency, while optimism relieves us of both. In rooting for your favorite sports team, choose optimism. In rooting for democracy, choose hope. And that's what we want to do, is we want to lean into this idea of we're not just hoping for the best. We're not just, wishing good news into the world. We're saying we've got to roll up our sleeves and we've got to become good news. Otherwise, there's no stories to tell.
Yeah.
And that was a game changer for me in the process of making this.
I love it, man. That's so cool. So tell me, how long ago was the initial launch, and how has it? I think I read somewhere that you have like 250,000 people, or maybe that's how many people you have gotten the newspaper. Like, it was a huge number, and you've been featured on New York Times since the last time we chatted. Miley Cyrus's fun show, which is like, what in the world? That's something to like call your parents and be like, hey, so just want to let you know you're gonna be seeing me on the news soon. Like, that is hilarious. So like, what does the Good Newspaper look like now, and the company you've started, and what's the setting for the future?
Yeah, when the Kickstarter finished, I was like, this is huge. This is unreal. And it's only grown since then. And we've dealt with all kinds of things. Like one of the newspaper printers we were dealing with went out of business. And like, there's all these like weird obstacles that have come and gone. But we've just really tried to stay focused on that goal of helping people feel less overwhelmed and more capable of doing good in the world. And I really feel like every business hits this like almost like lull. Like, you've got this initial energy, and then for 2 years you've just got to bust your ass and work hard to like be consistent and make things happen. And then at the end of that 2 years, people like start to notice it and recognize it because they've been seeing it so consistently. And it's happened to me in everything I've done. 2 years, 3 years into wedding photography, that's when things popped for me. 2-3 years into Instagram, 2-3 years into Snapchat, all these platforms, like that's when it clicked. And I think we just started seeing that, honestly, with the Good Newspaper. And yeah, I think it's just a testament to my team and their hard work, and our incredible community who, has just been supporting this thing. And so, yeah, now we reach thousands of subscribers to the newspaper in all 50 states. We were blown away when my friend Judson texted me and said, New York Times. And I went, what do you mean? Like, what? and he's like, you don't know you're in the New York Times today? And I was like, nobody told me this. And like, that was mind blowing. And then we got an email from Miley Cyrus's team the next day, and ended up on her Instagram Live. And so things are blowing up, and it, for me, it just comes back to that same message of, okay, well, let's try to use these opportunities to, be creative and innovative in the ways that we stay true to our core message of helping people feel less overwhelmed and more capable of doing good in the world.
Dude, I love it, man. That's so awesome. When is one last like final fun question for you is, now we so much of this episode was just talking about your transition points. When will the Good Newspaper and Good Co, when will that be longer than you have been a photographer or a storyteller?
Man, that's
what you need to
question.
Celebrate. If you're going to stick with that, and you might transition. Like, who knows how things look in the world? But it's like, I wonder. I'm like, okay, when does Branden call that his career? Rather than like, when do you step away from? Hey, Branden, are you still a photographer? Will you? When did you stop getting those emails or the storytelling emails? And then now you're finally like settled in.
That's so funny. Yeah, because there is that phase out. Nobody asked me to do wedding photography anymore.
Right.
But every once in a while, I get an email asking for photography.
Sure.
Nobody asks me to do Snapchat gigs anymore. And the Instagram gigs still trickle in here and there.
Yeah.
But like, first and foremost, all the emails I get are like, good news related and social impact related and nonprofit related. And so there really has been a pivot, and the newspaper has been going on for a little bit more than 3 years. The newsletter that I was talking about has been going on for closer to 5. The podcast is somewhere in between. And so, it is really like one of my longest term relationships outside of my relationship with my wife. And so there is a full on transition. And I love the pivots I've made. I think that it's been so valuable to not have my identity wrapped up in, I am a photographer, or I am a social media person, or, and not even, it's like, I am focused on the good in the world. I think that I will always keep that core focus of, how can I move the needle, make a difference with whatever I do. And I have no intentions of stopping good at any point in the near future, but it's it does feel like continually what I'm doing is I'm expanding the definition of who I am, and internally it just feels really helpful to be less and less in this box and more creatively motivated to create unique and innovative things out of that. Because I think that's the wonderful thing of pivoting is you realize, it's not that you just turned down a new road. It's that the road got wider and you just chose to go down a certain part of it, but you've got this whole new runway to play around in. And so, it'll be interesting to see what the next iteration is and what kind of comes next. And, now you're getting my gears turning. I've got no clue what's ahead, but I would have never expected this to happen. So, it's going to be crazy, whatever it is.
No, I'm excited, man. I think it's cool. It's fun too. I feel like, I wonder if millennials will have more fun than our parents' age, where we could like watch our friends take on new things, or like at least for me, one of my good friends who I've known for 13 years now, she knew me when I first started, taking photos, getting into it, becoming a photographer, and now, what we do now. And the whole time, even when I was like my first gig, she's like, "Oh yeah, you're building the empire." And it was very flattering at the beginning. And now I've very much like taken that.
That's amazing.
Cause of just like, yes, we're building the empire. And like we have more photographers on the team. So every time that happens, I'm like, yeah, we're building this thing. And, to serve the mission that we have. And it's like, especially for both of us, and again, myself, my story is like born in a small town, raised by a single parent, kicked out of college, and like now have this, this company that is working and making it happen. And we bought a house in DC. Like, what in the world? And it's so cool to watch, man. And you've been a huge influence. So I want to take one last final thing, if you have a second.
Yeah.
Out of your podcast, The Sounds Good with Branden Harvey. What are you loving right now during quarantine, day 75 for most people in the US? Like, what are you loving or binging right now?
Man, it's I feel like there's so much that I'm consuming. Like Netflix can't put out stuff fast enough for me, because a lot of my days, honestly, are just like, oh, today is spreadsheet day. And I'm like, I'm going to binge watch a show on spreadsheet day. And, but the thing that I'm really excited just came back is Hassan Minhaj's amazing show on Netflix, where he just dives deep into different issues in the world, like a beautiful deep dive. And he's doing a quarantine edition, which, is presumably like filmed at his house or something, but still visually stunning. It's just got one of the best visual designs of any show out there, but that's been like my favorite thing, that I'm just so happy it's back.
That's awesome. I love that, man. Well, dude, thank you so much for being on. It was an absolute pleasure. We'll send this out when it comes out, and I'd encourage everybody, where's the best place for people to go and find your work that you're doing? Say hi on Instagram. Like, where's the best place to find you?
Yeah. I'm so glad you asked. I forgot to mention, we just made the Good newspaper free for anybody who wants their first issue. So because of COVID, we were like, man, we just want to help get good news out into the world. And so literally you can go to goodgoodgood.co/membership, and you can just sign up and get your first newspaper mailed to your house for free. We're covering the shipping, the production, everything. Awesome. And then feel free to cancel if you want after that. No hard feelings. We just literally want to get these out the door. So go do that. We're also on Instagram, and I am on Instagram, and yeah, it's
Branden with an E, everybody, too.
Branden with an E. It is a little tricky.
I wonder, is there a Branden with an O, Harvey, somewhere?
Yeah, I keep in touch with him every once in a while. I'm like, hey man, how you doing? I remember, this is a little side note, but the day that I got featured on Instagram by Instagram itself, they mentioned me in the blog post, and they linked to my account and stuff, but I messaged the other Branden Harvey the next day. I was like, hey man, how you doing? He's like, doing good. I just gained a bunch of followers. I don't know why. And apparently one of the links or something was messed up, and a bunch of people were following him. And so there is apparently another Branden Harvey, and he's a nice guy.
I love it, man. Thanks so much, man. Have a wonderful day. And I'm super pumped for you, man. It's going to be awesome.
You too, man. Thanks so much for having me.
You've just got to love hearing from Branden Harvey, one of my favorite people on the planet and a guy who's hugely influenced my vision, brand, my life, my how I work, and what the type of work that I value. Gotta love him. So definitely go check him out on Instagram. Check out his company, Good. And it is just going to be a wonderful time for you to be finding out more about him. Also, I just want to mention this. If you're interested in supporting this free podcast during this time and hopefully has influence on your own life, I would love for you guys to come over to Patreon. That is our place where we're sharing a lot of practical photography and business tips on just things that you can make your business better during this time and more fulfilling. So for us, something we just shared as an example is we shared an SEO guide for building a blog post so that you can be found by Google and rank on the first page. We also shared our coronavirus plan as a company, like what is Mason Photography doing? How do we reschedule? All that kind of stuff. So if you're dying to kind of find out more of the in-between, the behind the scenes of what happens with a photography company and business, and want to support the podcast, that's where you can go, patreon.com/thebeardedtog. Thank you guys so much for everything. Have a great day, everybody, and keep being awesome.